Mr. Daydream by Roger Hargreaves. This is a story about Mr. Daydream. You know what he looks like, don't you? Because you've seen his picture on the front of this book. It's also a story about a little boy called Jack. And you don't know what he looks like, so here's a picture of him. Now, Jack was a very good little boy. He always ate all of his lunch. He always went to bed when he was told. He always said please and thank you. But Jack was a daydream. Whenever he was supposed to be thinking about something, he found himself thinking about something else. Daydreaming. One day, Jack was at school. He was sitting at his desk, listening to the teacher talking about history. It was a very warm day, and Jack was very glad he was sitting at the back of the class next to an open window. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, Jack saw something outside the window, on the glass in front of the school. Something blue. It was a small, cloud-shaped figure. Jack couldn't believe his eyes. The figure looked at Jack, looking at him, smiled and waved. Jack looked at his teacher, who was still talking. Then he got up quietly, ever so quietly, and slipped out of the open window. He crossed on the grass to a strange-looking cloud-shaped figure. "Hello," he said. "Who are you?" I'm Mr. Daydream," said the figure. "What's your name?" "Jack," said Jack. "I'm going off on an adventure," said Mr. Daydream to Jack. "Would you like to come with me?" "Oh, yes, please," replied Jack. "Very well, then," said Mr. Daydream, and putting his 2 fingers in his mouth, he let out the loudest whistle Jack has ever heard in his whole life. A huge bird swooped down out of the sky and landed beside Jack and Mr. Daydream. "Come on," Mr. Daydream said to Jack, and climbed onto the bird's back. Jack climbed on it too. It was a really enormous bird, and there was plenty of room for both of them. "Hold on," said Mr. Daydream. Jack held on tight. The huge bird flapped its huge wings, and suddenly they were up high in the air. They flew faster and faster over the countryside. They flew over fields and farms and towns and hills and trees and valleys until they were far, far away from Jack's school. It was very exciting. Mr. Daydream turned to Jack. "How would you like to go to Africa?" he shouted. They were traveling so fast now, Jack just nodded his head and held on even tighter. And they flew away and flew across the sea. Suddenly, it seemed in no time at all, there below them was Africa. The bird landed in a jungle clearing, and Jack saw Mr. Daydream climbed off the bird's back. It was very hot. "Come on," said Mr. Daydream to Jack. "Let's go and explore." And so they set off, pushing their way through the jungle. Suddenly, in the middle of the clearing, they saw an elephant. "Hello, Mr. Daydream," trumpeted the elephant down its trunk. "Would you like a lift?" "Yes, please," replied Mr. Daydream, and the elephant raised out its trunk, picked him up, and put him on its back. Then he reached out of his trunk again, picked up Jack, and put him on his back. It was very high. The elephant carried them through the jungle until they came to a river. Then he set them down on the ground and said goodbye and went back into the jungle. "How are we going to cross the river?" Jack asked Mr. Daydream. "Perhaps I can be of assistance," wheezed a particular oily voice coming through the river. They looked up. And there was a crocodile. Use my back as a bridge, suggested the crocodile. It was very helpful. They were halfway across the river on the crocodile's back when the crocodile grinned a rather nastier grin, all teeth and no smile. Then, flickering its enormous tail and shooting Jack and Mr. Daydream up into the air, the crocodile opened its horribly large mouth and waited. It was very frightening. "Oh dear," gasped Jack as he looked down at the enormous mouthful of teeth. "Oh dear, oh help!" Mr. Daydream, upside down beside him, put 2 fingers in his mouth and let down out that very large whistle of his. Suddenly, just as the crocodile's mouth was about to go snap, the big bird swooped out of the sky. Mr. Daydream and Jack landed right on the bird's back. "Phew," said Jack. "Butter," said the crocodile. "Well, I promised you an adventure, didn't I?" grinned Mr. Daydream. "You certainly did. And now," said Mr. Daydream, "I think we will go to Australia." And they did. And Jack learned how to throw a boomerang, so that always comes back to him. "And now," said Mr. Daydream, "I think we'll go to the Wild West." And they did. Mr. Daydream found a huge 10-gallon cowboy hat. The trouble was, when he put it on, he couldn't see out. "Jack!" he called underneath the hat. "Jack! Jack!" Suddenly, Jack realized that it wasn't Mr. Daydream saying his name. It was his teacher. And Jack wasn't in the Wild West. He was sitting at his school desk. "Jack," said the teacher again, "you've been daydreaming." It was true. He had. But you know something? Daydreaming is more fun than history.